My dad told everyone my mom betrayed him. 20 years later, I found her journals hidden in our attic. My name's Caleb, and for as long as I can remember, the story went like this. My mom walked out on us when I was 9, ran off with some guy from her office, and left my dad heartbroken and humiliated. That's what everyone believed. My aunts, my grandparents, our church friends. They all rallied around Dad, and I did too, because what else was I supposed to do? I was a kid, and Dad, he was the grieving husband raising a boy on his own, doing his best in the face of betrayal. So I cut my mom out, blocked every letter, ignored every birthday card. When she sent gifts, Dad tossed them. When she called, he handed me the phone, then stood there silently until I hung up. She's not part of our life anymore, Caleb, he'd say. She made her choice. And I believed him. God, I believed him so hard that I built my identity around it. I was the son of a wronged man, the product of a mother who couldn't be trusted. And Dad, for all his faults, the drinking, the mood swings, the silence that stretched for days, he was loyal. He stayed. Until last winter. I was home for Christmas. 31 now, a teacher in Detroit, still single, still trying to unlearn some of the damage I didn't even know was damage until my late 20s. Dad had gotten slower, stiffer. The house was falling into disrepair. Same beige siding. Same half-dead oak tree out front. Same attic I used to hide in when he got too loud. He asked me to help clean it out. Too many damn boxes, he grumbled. Half this junk is your mom's anyway. The attic was freezing. Dust everywhere. Old Christmas decorations, yellowed newspapers, high school trophies that didn't belong to me. And in the corner, a floral print trunk I didn't recognize. Locked, but not tightly. I popped it open expecting photo albums, or maybe more ornaments. What I found were journals. 10 of them, maybe more. All identical. Leather covers, worn edges, and my mom's handwriting, the kind I hadn't seen since I was 9. Neat, loopy, unmistakable. I sat there cross-legged on the floor, flipping through pages, feeling like I was touching something forbidden. Her words weren't angry. They weren't wild. They were scared, thoughtful, full of pain, and completely different from everything I'd ever been told. She wrote about the night Dad shoved her against the wall because dinner was cold. She wrote about the time she tried to leave, not to cheat, but to stay with a friend, and he threatened to burn her clothes on the lawn. She wrote about waking up to him watching her sleep, whispering, "You'll never take him from me." She stayed because she was scared, because the church told her to, because no one believed her, because I didn't believe her. My hands were shaking. I read until I couldn't breathe, until the words blurred, until I had to slam the journal shut and sit in silence while the wind howled against the attic windows. I didn't say anything to Dad that night, or the next. I didn't confront him, not right away. Instead, I waited, observed, listened, and slowly, I started seeing the cracks. His stories never lined up. Little details kept shifting. One day she left in July, the next it was September. One day she was with a coworker, the next it was the pastor's cousin. Always vague, always with a sneer. I stayed another week. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure who my father really was. And the only person who could tell me the truth was the woman I'd spent 2 decades erasing. So I made a call, the first one in 20 years. And when she answered, her voice cracked like she was expecting me. "Caleb." I opened my mouth, but I didn't know what to say. She met me at a diner off the I-75, just south of Toledo. Neutral ground. Halfway point. I got there first. Sat in a corner booth nursing a lukewarm coffee, hands shaking. I'd spent the whole drive replaying every word she ever said to me that I ignored. Every letter I never opened. Every time I hung up and felt righteous about it. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. Older, obviously. More fragile around the eyes. But when she smiled, cautious, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to, I felt something splinter inside me. She sat down slowly. Didn't reach for my hands. Didn't cry. "I didn't think you'd ever call," she said. I swallowed. "I found your journals." Her face paled. "In the attic. They were in a trunk." She nodded slowly. I wondered if he'd burn them. I guess part of him wanted to keep the story buried. There was a silence then. Heavy. Neither of us sure how to move through it. I leaned in. "Why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you try harder to tell me the truth?" She blinked. "Once. Twice." "I did, Caleb. I tried everything. But he got to you first. And he was good at it. He made me the villain before I even knew I was leaving. I didn't want to believe her, but I did, because I'd seen it, felt it. The control, the rage beneath the calm. The way Dad would change the story mid-sentence and expect you to forget the first version. You wrote that he hurt you. She looked down. Yes. More than once. She didn't answer. The silence was answer enough. Why didn't you take me with you? She laughed, a brittle sound. He told the courts I was mentally unstable. Had witnesses, neighbors, church leaders. All of them said I was emotional, dramatic, unstable. You were a child, Caleb. You needed stability. And he gave them the performance of a lifetime. My hands clenched under the table. He used me. She looked up, eyes filled with something I couldn't name. He used both of us. For a long moment, we just sat there. Two people trying to stitch together the same story from opposite ends. And then she said, quietly, "You want to know the worst part?" I nodded. When I left, he said to me, "You'll never be anything without me. You're just a story I'm going to rewrite." And damn if he didn't try. I stared out the window. The highway buzzed with winter traffic. Somewhere behind me, a coffee pot hissed. My voice came out hoarse. "He always told me you betrayed us. That you abandoned me." She didn't flinch, just nodded. And I believed him. "I know. I hated you." She smiled. Not bitter, not angry, just tired. "And yet here you are." That broke me. The waitress came by, asked if we were ready to order. Neither of us even looked up. "What now?" I asked. Mom took a breath. "Now you decide what part of the story you want to keep believing." I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see the villain my father had painted. I saw my mother. I didn't drive home after the diner. I sat in the parking lot for a long time, engine off, lights out, hands frozen around the steering wheel. The sun dipped below the horizon while I just stared out at the highway, watching trucks blur past like time was trying to outrun me. I kept hearing her voice. Not just what she said that day, but her voice from the past. The ones I ignored. That I let fade into voicemail static or bounce off the walls of a home where she'd been erased. I didn't cry. Not yet. That would come later. Instead, I drove to a cheap motel an hour north. Checked in under an old alias I used to use for poker nights in college. Caleb Jameson. It felt like stepping outside myself. I didn't sleep. Just laid on the hard mattress staring at the popcorn ceiling, thinking about what she said. "You're just a story I'm going to rewrite." And now here I was, living proof that it worked. I'd carried his version of the story like a scar for 20 years. The next morning, I called my aunt, Dad's younger sister. She was always the softest one in the family. The kind who sent Christmas cards with glitter and remembered birthdays no one else did. "Hey," I said, "can I ask you something about Mom?" Silence on the line. Then what brought this on? I saw her. She exhaled like I'd just cracked open a sealed tomb. "Did she tell you everything?" "She told me enough. But I need to know what you saw. Back then." My aunt hesitated. Then she whispered, "Caleb." I knew he had a temper. But he was my brother. I didn't want to believe he'd hurt her. I leaned forward, pressing the phone tight. "But did you ever see anything?" More silence. Then, once. Thanksgiving. You were upstairs playing Mario Kart. Your mom dropped a glass in the kitchen. Your dad," he snapped, grabbed her by the arm so hard she bruised. I told her she should leave. She said she'd already tried. I closed my eyes. That memory had been sanitized in my head. I remembered the glass breaking. I remembered the yelling. But not the fear. Not hers. Why didn't anyone say anything? Because he was charming. Because in public, he was the grieving saint. And because every time she pushed back, he twisted it until we were the ones doubting our own eyes. I hung up not out of anger, but because I needed space. And time. I drove back to my childhood home. Pulled into the driveway like I had 100 times. The house looked the same, but I didn't. Dad was on the porch, cigarette in hand, like he'd been waiting. He nodded toward the steps. "You going somewhere?" "Just got back." He studied me. "You look like you haven't slept." "Haven't." He shrugged. "Suit yourself." We sat in silence for a long time. Just two men watching the wind rattle the dead leaves. Then I said, "Why do you keep the journals?" He didn't flinch. Just flicked his ash into the cold air. "Thought maybe one day you'd find them." "You wanted me to?" He looked at me, eyes tired. "You were old enough to start asking questions." "And what?" "You figured I'd piece it together on my own." Eventually, my hands curled into fists. Not from rage. From the sheer weight of everything. He didn't even deny it. Didn't argue. Just accepted it like bad weather. You lied to me for 20 years. I told you what I thought you needed. What you needed, I shot back. He looked away. And for the first time, I saw something real crack through. Not guilt, exactly, but weariness. You think I didn't hate myself for it? You think I slept easy knowing I'd turned you against your mother? I stared at him. You made me believe she abandoned me. You turned my childhood into a script. And you got everyone to play along. Because the truth was uglier, he said. Because I was ashamed. Because I didn't want to be the man who hid his wife and lost his kid. I stood. The porch creaked under me. My throat felt raw. You didn't lose your kid, Dad. You rewrote him. He looked up at me, face hollow, and I walked inside, past the living room where I once sobbed after she left, past the hallway where I hung my high school photos, back into the attic. I grabbed every journal. I packed a bag. And this time, I wasn't just leaving. I was taking the story with me. I didn't go back to Detroit right away. Instead, I drove west, through back roads, avoiding highways, letting the landscape unravel my thoughts. I stopped at gas stations I didn't recognize, slept in motels with doors that stuck and sheets that smelled faintly of bleach. I needed distance, space, somewhere to breathe where his voice couldn't find me. The journals were in the trunk. Every night, I'd pull one out, sit cross-legged on the bed, and read until my eyes burned. And I learned things I wasn't ready for. About the night I had that terrible fever, the one I always thought Dad nursed me through. It was Mom. She stayed up all night, cooling my forehead with rags, singing softly while he stormed out because the crying annoyed him. Or the Halloween where I was a pirate, and I tripped and split my chin on the curb. I remembered his arms lifting me, the emergency room lights. But it was her who wrapped the towel, her who pressed against the bleeding and whispered, "You're okay. I've got you." It was like living someone else's memories. Rewatching a film where the hero gets unmasked, and suddenly every scene feels different. I called her again, not because I knew what to say, but because I didn't want the silence to grow roots. She answered on the second ring. "Hey," I said. "Hey," she echoed. "You okay?" "Not even close. But I'm trying." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I didn't expect this." "Neither did I." "You're allowed to be angry, Caleb. You're allowed to feel like you were robbed." I laughed, bitter. "That's the thing. I don't even know what to feel. Anger, guilt, grief, shame. It's all there, stacked like furniture in a burning room." She exhaled. "That's healing. It's not neat." "Did you know he'd keep the journals?" "I hoped he wouldn't find them. But if he did, I thought maybe someday you'd read them. Maybe when he was gone." "Why didn't you take me with you, Mom?" She hesitated. Not defensive, just deeply, soulfully tired. "Because I tried. But I had no money, no lawyer, no credibility. And he made sure everyone thought I was unstable. He built a wall around you, and I couldn't climb it." My throat clenched. "I hated you for so long." "I know. And I forgave you every day." There it was. That weight again. Forgiveness. Unearned. Freely given. "I don't know how to move forward from here," I admitted. "Then don't. Not yet. Just rest. Let the truth sit with you. Let it hurt. It's supposed to." I nodded, even though she couldn't see. That night, I dreamed I was 9 again, standing in our kitchen. My mom was packing a suitcase, and Dad was yelling. Except this time, I walked over and held her hand. And when she looked at me, her eyes didn't hold fear. They held hope. I woke up crying. Not loud, just slow tears rolling into the pillow. And for the first time in my adult life, I whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." Not because I expected her to hear it, but because I needed to say it. Because maybe, just maybe, that was the first step toward becoming someone else's version of the truth. Someone who didn't repeat the story he was given. Someone who rewrote his own. I didn't speak to my father again for 3 months. I couldn't. Every time I thought about calling him, I'd feel my chest tighten. Not with anger. Not anymore. Something deeper. Like mourning. But mourning what? The man I thought he was? Or the one he turned out to be? In the quiet of that distance, something strange happened. I started remembering things. Not the kind of memories I'd carried like trophies. Not the camping trips or baseball games we used to tell stories about. No, the small things. How he'd slam cabinet doors when he was angry. How he never apologized. Not even once. Not after yelling. Not after throwing something. Not after I flinched. How I'd wait, stiff and silent, for the storm to pass like I was wallpaper. Invisible unless he needed someone to blame. It wasn't until I saw it from the outside, through Mom's journals, through her voice, that I realized how much I'd normalized it. How I'd mistaken fear for respect, silence for peace. I spent those months working, teaching, trying to be the kind of man who could break the cycle. I called Mom every Sunday. We didn't talk about Dad anymore, just life. She'd tell me about her garden, her cat, the new neighbor who kept forgetting trash day. And slowly, I felt the knot start to loosen. Until one morning, I got a call from my aunt. "It's your dad," she said, voice tight. "He's in the hospital. Stroke." My stomach dropped. "Is he alive? But weak. You should come." I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the phone like it was a weapon. She whispered, "He's asking for you." That night, I packed a bag and drove through the dark, same way I had before. Only this time, I wasn't running. I was preparing. The hospital was cold, sterile, the kind of place where time feels suspended. When I walked into his room, I almost turned around. He looked smaller, deflated. His skin was pale, lips chapped. Machines beeped in soft rhythms. There was an oxygen tube in his nose, and his eyes fluttered open when I sat down. He tried to speak, but it came out slurred. I leaned closer. "It's me, Caleb." His hand twitched. "You don't have to talk," I said. "Just listen." And for the first time, I told him the truth. About what I found. About what I remembered. About who he was. To me, to Mom, to himself. I told him I forgave him. But not because he deserved it. Because I needed to. Because holding on to it meant letting him live in me longer than he had a right to. His eyes welled up. A tear slipped down one cheek. I didn't know if it was guilt or grief or just the body's last way of letting go. But I stood. I kissed his forehead. And I walked out. He died 3 days later. No dramatic final speech. No letter. No apology. Just silence. The funeral was quiet. Closed casket. My aunt sat beside me, holding my hand. No church crowd. No fake eulogies. Just a few people who'd loved him, or thought they did. Afterward, I visited the old house one last time. I walked through every room. Took one photo off the wall. Me at 9, sitting on Dad's shoulders, laughing. And I replaced it with a note. Taped it to the empty nail. It said, "This house ran on silence. Not anymore." Then I locked the door. And left it behind for good. Grief is strange when it's mixed with relief. People tried to say the right things. Coworkers, neighbors, a couple old friends who saw my dad's obituary online. "Sorry for your loss. He was a good man. He must be proud of you." I smiled, nodded, said thank you. But the truth is, I didn't lose a father. I lost a version of him I'd already buried in my mind months ago. And every compliment about him felt like a stone in my chest. It took me weeks to understand that mourning isn't always about who someone was. Sometimes it's about who you thought they were. The version you clung to because the truth would have cracked you open. And yeah, I cracked. I didn't teach that semester. I asked for time off. Spent it walking the streets of Detroit in the cold, hands buried in pockets, trying to figure out what a man's supposed to do after he dismantles the only story he ever believed about his life. One day, I ended up at a bookstore downtown. Quiet place. Smelled like old pages and coffee beans. I wandered in with no real plan and walked out with a leather-bound journal, just like hers. And I started writing. Not just what happened, but what it felt like. I wrote about the silence, the anger, the ache of realizing you were lied to, not once, but for years, by someone you loved, someone you defended, someone you wanted to be proud of. I wrote about Mom, her voice, the way she never pushed, the way she let me come to her in my own time. And I wrote about forgiveness, how it doesn't feel like peace, how it feels like cleaning out a wound with salt and sunlight. That journal became my anchor. A few months later, I called her. "I've been thinking," I said, "about coming to visit. Not just for a day, for a while." She didn't say anything right away. Then, quietly, "I'd like that." So I did. I packed up my apartment, put most of it in storage, took a leave of absence longer than I thought I'd ever ask for. Drove west again, but this time with no plan to run. Her place was small, cozy, a garden out front, wind chimes on the porch that caught the sun like they were made of glass. When she opened the door, I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't seen since I was a child. Safety, not the illusion of it, the real thing. We hugged, long quiet, no words. Over the next few weeks, I got to know her not just as my mother, but as a person, a woman who'd rebuilt her life from ashes. who still flinched when doors slammed, who took deep breaths before speaking hard truths, but who smiled more easily now. And one night, while we were watching some terrible game show and eating takeout, she said, "You know, I used to imagine what you'd be like, the man you'd become." I glanced over. "Yeah, you're better than I imagined." That did it. Not the journals, not the funeral, not the years of untangling lies. That. I leaned back on the couch, stared at the ceiling, and let myself feel it all. The loss, the truth, the beginning. Living with my mom at 32 wasn't something I planned. But for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. We fell into a rhythm. Mornings on the porch with coffee, afternoons in the garden, evenings cooking simple meals, and watching reruns of shows she used to love before everything fell apart. There was healing in the ordinary. But healing isn't always gentle. One morning, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at an envelope. Her hands were still, but her face was tight. Pale. "What's that?" I asked. "A letter. From your father's lawyer." I sat down slowly. "What does it say?" She slid it over. Inside was a copy of his will. He'd left me everything. The house, the savings, a small life insurance policy, even some old stocks I didn't know he had. Nothing to her. Not a dime. I looked at her, expecting anger, bitterness, some old wound to reopen. But she just shook her head. "It doesn't matter. I never expected anything. Still, it's cruel." She smiled, sad and small. That's who he was, Caleb. Even in death, he wanted to keep the story his. And maybe that's what hit me hardest, that even from beyond the grave, he was still trying to divide us, still clinging to the version of events where she didn't exist. But I had the final say now. So I called the lawyer, asked about disclaiming the inheritance, redirecting it, donating some of it. And I made one big decision. I sold the house, the place where I grew up, the walls that held more silence than laughter. I didn't keep anything except the journals. I used some of the money to help Mom finish renovating her little place, put in new windows, a better heater, fix the fence. We built a greenhouse in the backyard. One night, we stood there, surrounded by blooming basil and young tomato vines. She touched the edge of a new planter box and said, "He never beat this, you know." "What do you mean?" "This peace, this life. He tried to crush it. In me, in you. But look what we're standing in." And she was right. He may have written the first half of our story, but we were finishing it. Together. I started writing more. Not just for myself, but publicly. Blogs, essays. A couple of pieces got picked up by small journals. One was about inherited silence, how it passes like blood. The response was overwhelming. Emails, messages from people who'd buried their own truths for decades, who'd been told the wrong version of their childhood, their parents, themselves. It made me feel less alone. And one night, sitting at my desk, I realized something. I wasn't just healing. I was changing, becoming the man I needed when I was 9. And for the first time, I didn't feel haunted by my father's shadow. I felt like I was finally standing in the light. A year later, I stood in front of a crowded room with a microphone in my hand and a journal in my back pocket. It was a local library event, Voices Unspoken, a reading series for survivors, people who'd clawed their way out of silence. I was the closing speaker. My mom sat in the front row, her hands clasped, her eyes shining. I cleared my throat, looked out at a room full of strangers who somehow already knew me. And I told them everything. About the father who rewrote our history. About the mother I was taught to forget. About the attic. The journals. The silence that shaped me. And the voice I'd finally found. I ended with a passage I'd written months ago. The one that started it all. We inherit stories like houses. Some are filled with light, others with dust. But no matter how long we live in them, one day we must ask, is this truly mine? Or did someone else build these walls? There was a long silence after I finished. Then applause. Not polite, not soft, full-bodied, real. I stepped down from the podium, feeling 10 pounds lighter. Later, a woman in her 60s came up to me, told me her father did the same thing, told her lies about her mother for decades. "You just told my story," she said. And I realized, this wasn't just about me. It never was. We carry inherited truths and inherited lies, but we also carry the power to break them, to rewrite, to remember. That night, I walked home with Mom. We didn't say much. Didn't need to. The stars were out. The air was cool. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing answers. I was living the truth. And it was enough. Months passed. Seasons shifted. Snow gave way to spring, and the greenhouse flourished. Tomatoes the size of fists. Strawberries so sweet they didn't need sugar. I found peace in the soil, in the rhythm of something growing where once there'd only been rot. I started teaching again, but differently this time. I taught a unit on narrative bias, on memory, on the stories we carry and why it matters who tells them. My students, a bunch of high school juniors, asked the hard questions, and I let them. I told them about my father, about the story I'd lived, and the truth I found buried in the attic. Some cried. One kid stayed after class every day for a week just to talk. Because once someone opens the door, everyone realizes they were holding a secret too. One afternoon, I brought my mom in to speak. She sat in my classroom, nervous but composed. Told them what it was like to lose a son not to death, but to a narrative. She said, sometimes the hardest part of surviving isn't escaping. It's knowing the people you love won't believe you. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. After class, one girl hugged her, whispered something, and my mom hugged her back like she'd been waiting to. That night, I found the old pirate costume in a storage bin in Mom's attic. Still stained at the chin, still missing the plastic sword. I held it up, remembering the fall, the blood, the lie. Then I took a lighter and watched it burn. Not out of anger, not revenge, closure. Because not every memory deserves a frame. Sometimes healing means letting go of even the parts you once thought were happy. We built a bookshelf in the greenhouse, stacked it with journals. Hers, mine, now one from a former student, too. She dropped it off with a note. Because someone told their story first, I could tell mine. We called it the Wall of Truth. Anyone could add to it. One night, after the stars came out, I asked my mom, "Do you ever wish you'd fought harder to keep me?" She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I used to, for years. But now? No." I turned to her, surprised. "Because if you had," I said, "maybe we'd have had more time. Maybe. Or maybe you'd have grown up resenting me, still believing his version. And we'd have lost everything anyway." She touched my shoulder. "We're here now. That's enough." It was not perfect, not painless, but true. And sometimes the truth doesn't arrive in thunder or applause. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the voice of your mother, in the hands of a student, in the soil of a greenhouse that never should have grown anything at all, but did. The greenhouse became more than a garden. It became a sanctuary. People came, neighbors, strangers, survivors who'd read my essays or heard about the teacher with the journals. We started hosting open nights. No microphones, no stages, just folding chairs, warm light, and the invitation. Tell your story, if you're ready. And if you're not, sit with us anyway. The first time a man in his 70s stood up and said, "My father beat my mother," and we all pretended it didn't happen, I saw something shift in the room. Not pity, recognition. He left behind a notebook that night. We added it to the Wall of Truth. A teenage boy came next. Quiet, nervous. He read a poem about watching his mom cry behind a closed door and not knowing what to say. Then a woman who said she hadn't spoken to her sister in 20 years. Until she read my piece online and finally made the call. Each voice stitched into the air like thread through fabric. And the room got warmer. Not because of the heater, but because shame can't survive sunlight. I still think about my father. Not every day, but enough. I wonder what he'd think if he saw us now. If he'd feel regret. If he'd feel pride. If he'd even recognize the man I became. I used to wish he'd written me one final letter. But now I know, I don't need his words. I have my own. And I'm not alone. One afternoon, I found my mom in the greenhouse, reading one of the journals. Hers. She looked up, smiled. "Do you think," she asked, "that silence has memory?" I sat beside her. Maybe, but truth speaks louder. We listened to the wind rattle the glass, the soft hum of life continuing. And I realized, we'd built something out of the wreckage. Not in spite of it. Because of it. A new legacy. Not written in silence, but spoken and heard.